Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Fourth and Frames. Tonight, I'm your host, Rhett Manuel. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Chris Battistell and Drew Scott. And tonight, we're exposing you to one of my favorite ways to play fantasy football, Salary Cap Dynasty, with one of the Dynasty Nerds himself and an OG friend of the show in Jayson Snyder. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get it popping. To all our viewers, whether you're on YouTube, X, Twitter, Twitch, wherever you are, thanks for dropping in with us tonight. We have an OG friend of the show, one of our favorite guys, one of the first guys we chopped it up with here whenever we started this a year ago, Jayson Snyder. Jayson, first off, man, it's so great to see you. Tell us how you've been, what you've been up to, dog.
It's awesome to be back with you guys. I mean, the feeling's mutual. When you guys asked me to be on, I was psyched to get the invite. So I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to talk about one of my favorite formats tonight.
Yeah, man, we should have a good time with it. But first thing I want to do before we get into talking about this niche format in Salary Cap Dynasty, I want to go around the frames and talk about last week in the NFL. First off, getting into the championship games. First game, the San Francisco 49ers defeated the Detroit Lions by a 34-31 margin, with Detroit blowing a 24-7 lead in the third quarter. So, Jayson, I'm going to kick it off with you, and let's just ask the obvious question. In your opinion, should Detroit have gone so hard and still played so aggressively in that spot, being up 17 points?
I mean, obviously, that's the conversation this week, is that Campbell's been taking a lot of knocks for the way he was uber aggressive in that second half, and particularly the fourth down stuff that he was, going for it on fourth downs when he was in field goal range. And I think that's fair. His supporters are going to tell you that's how they got there, and that's how he was going to ride or die with that philosophy. But I think when you get in a game like that and you've got a 24-7 lead at halftime and you've got all the momentum, you got to play it smart. And he came out, if you just play ball control in the second half of that game, you make it prohibitively difficult for the Niners to get back into that game. You just run the ball and you grind them down. And that's supposed to be what they're all about. I mean, grit and all that stuff that gets talked about with Detroit. I mean, what better time to tell your, five guys up front, go win us the game. We got a 17-point lead. It's halftime. We're going to grind these guys down and we're going to get the win. I really feel like maybe, I don't want to say the lights got too bright for them, but I think knowing the history and knowing how their fans and all that stuff that was riding on their backs, like to get to that Super Bowl berth, and you look around and it's halftime and it's 24-7, you think like, man, are we really going to do this? I think they almost kind of like outsmarted themselves. They thought like, we got to do this. And it just became, the pressure kind of caused them to do some really uncharacteristic or goofy things.
Yeah. So, Chris, what's the takeaway for Detroit ultimately out of this game? What do you think they evolved? Do you think they just go pedal to the metal full on from here? What's Detroit's next step after what we can't call anything other than a massive collapse?
I mean, just getting stronger, really, trying to fill the holes in their offense and defense, bring in another wide receiver that's maybe not going to catch one of the most important balls of that team's whole season, like Josh Reynolds did on that, I think it was that third or fourth down there, that one crucial play where he dropped it. So they're built in a way that they can spend maybe some of their draft capital, some of their early draft capital on some luxury pieces for that offense, even on that defense as well. So keep doing what they're doing. Their OC stayed, so they're going to have a lot of the same kind of guys there still on both sides of the ball and the coaching staff. The team that's going to win the Super Bowl is the team that always makes the adjustments. Yes, their identity, like Jayson said, was to go for it on fourth down in those situations, but you got to take the points there, because if you don't take the points there like they did and they lose the ball on that fourth down, that's a momentum changer for the San Francisco 49ers. You take the 3 points, it may still be a 3-score game, but that 17-point lead is now a 20-point lead. And when you start getting into the psyche of how these athletes think when they see that 20-point lead, we just got scored on again instead of we just stopped them on 4th down. We're getting the ball back. Now it's your guys' turn. Go catch a pass off some guy's helmet, make these spectacular plays that'll get us to where we got to go. Those are the things that ultimately comes down to coaching. So hopefully there's a bit of philosophy change in that coaching room. We know that the coaches are most likely staying there. So hopefully there's just a little bit of a tweak, a little bit of philosophy change for the Lions.
Yeah, 100% agreed. But let's just call it what you said. You mentioned it. That Ayuk catch is just one of those strokes of good luck, one of those magical plays
that
just
New York Giants play, man. It's just that, yeah.
You just cannot plan for something like that happening. But I'll say this, and it's one of those things, I was rooting for Detroit to get there, but hopefully they take some lessons and evolve from that. And speaking of evolving, guys, in the AFC Championship game, the Kansas City Chiefs playing a little bit of a different style of ball all year than they have in years past. And yeah, here they are once again back in the Super Bowl after a 17-10 win and shutting down Drew's guy in Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. So ultimately, Drew, I have to come to you with this question. This isn't the same sort of Chiefs offensive team that we've shown in the past, but in your opinion, do you think this is the best Chiefs team we've seen yet because of that defensive unit that they have this year?
It's definitely in the discussion. There's some of the offenses in the past that they've had have just been so incredibly good, and the defenses have still been, good enough. They just haven't been this good. So I guess it's just kind of pick your flavor. If you like the defensive dominance, then this is probably going to be your favorite Chiefs team. I prefer the teams with Tyreek and the way that offense exploded. Those are my favorite Chiefs teams. So I would probably still give those teams the edge, just the way that the NFL is constructed and geared toward the offense now. But it's definitely very interesting to see the defense carry this team the way that it has and see the offense just kind of get along. So it just, if they're able to keep this defense together for a couple of years and get this offense right, it's just like, I mean, damn, the offense finally has a down year, and here they are. They're still back in the Super Bowl. It's just like, if you're a fan of an AFC team that isn't the Chiefs, it's got to be so damn frustrating. I'm thankful that I don't have to deal with it on my side, but that's got to be tough.
Yeah, youngest defensive unit in the league on average age on top of that. So, if they keep it together, they're there for a while. And I want to go ahead and bring this to back to you, Jayson, in this situation. So now that we have this Super Bowl matchup, let's go ahead and round the frames once again, and let's go ahead and talk about this. Let's start with Jayson. Super Bowl, who is your early winner, and who is your MVP as of today in that game?
I mean, we just talked about the way that the Chiefs are winning these games in the playoffs, and with that defense looking the way that it does, we talked about the Lions and the coaching. I mean, you can't find a team that's coached better than the Chiefs. When you look at that AFC game, the Ravens completely unraveled there. I mean, they got too hyped. They were, they're taunting people. They're fumbling. They're trying to be bigger than the moment instead of just staying within themselves, and it bit them. And all through these Chiefs games that you've watched, the 3 games that they played in the playoffs, they're composed, they're prepared, and they got Mahomes. I mean, whether you like him or not, I mean, he's the new Tom Brady. Like, he's got the target on his back, and until somebody dethrones him, he's the guy. So I'm not crazy enough to pick against him. I've seen him do it with offensive teams. I've seen him do it with defensive teams. I've seen him do it with what people consider to be middling talent, and they're back. They're back again. So I'm going to go with the Chiefs, and I'm going to say he's got to be the MVP.
Drew?
Yeah, this is pretty simple for me because there's no way in hell I'm picking the 49ers to win. Like, there's not a team I hate more in the league than the 49ers. And I get to just pick the next dynasty instead. So I'll just roll with that. But yeah, I mean, Mahomes, Kelsey, those guys always just seem to show up. And I don't know if you guys saw this. I saw a tweet for each of them. Now that they've played so many playoff games together, they've basically played like a full NFL regular season of playoff games. They've had like 17 playoff games, and their stats in those games are so unreal. I wish I had the tweets in front of me so I could read it out. But those two in the playoffs, Andy Reid in the playoffs, ever since he got Pat Mahomes, I mean, it's just his play calling mixed with Mahomes' ability. I don't really give a damn who's catching the ball outside of Kelsey. And I like Rashee Rice, but just with those guys showing up the way that they do in big games, and now they have a defense to back it up too.
Right.
It makes it, even if it looked incredibly stupid to pick against the 49ers, if they were playing somebody different, I'd still be picking against them anyway, but this makes it a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
Chris?
Yeah, I heard an interesting stat today that I think Patrick Mahomes has the same amount of playoff wins as Peyton Manning, which is absolutely crazy considering how long Peyton Manning was in the league, and Patrick Mahomes is only 28 years old. So the fact that he's already has that much wins under his belt, he's hard to bet against, but I'm going to go San Francisco 49ers way here. And I think the defense, 2 weeks to prepare.
I didn't want it to be a sweep, man. That's bad luck.
And that's
I hear you. That's another reason why I wanted to do it. I didn't want to give them the fourth and frames jinx, but 2 weeks to prepare. If they take a page out of the Miami Dolphins playbook in that week 3 matchup where they completely shut down Travis Kelce, and they're going to rely on Isaiah Pacheco, a running back is something that the San Francisco 49ers can stop. So it's going to be one of those games where it's going to come down to the Kansas City offense versus the San Francisco defense, and San Francisco 49ers defense is just going to do enough to stop the Kansas City Chiefs. And we all know the Kansas City Chiefs defense weakness is the running back, and San Francisco 49ers have one of the best, if not the best running back in the game. So San Francisco 49ers, Super Bowl winner, Christian McCaffrey, Super Bowl MVP.
Look, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to be contrarian. I'm going to be a chaos man. I'm just going to go ahead and say Chiefs win this game. And I'm going to go just to see America cringe, because that's what we do. Travis Kelce for MVP and excessive screen time for Taylor Swift in the process. That's what I'm going for, baby. Let's get into a couple other things around the league before we go ahead and get into why we're here tonight. First off, big news coming out of the offensive coordinator / head coaching front this week, and that Ben Johnson and Bobby Slovic both staying on as offensive coordinators. Jason, I'm going to start with you. Ben Johnson has been in the head coaching speculation for a couple years now. Is it potentially the possibility that it might pass him by, and that 2 years on he's passed on a job? Does he get that same consideration next year, being that he's already passed on these things twice?
I mean, I suppose that's always a risk, right, when you make a decision like that. But by the same token, I mean, you got to respect what he's doing. He's saying, I believe in my guys. I want another crack at this thing. I'm not going to abandon them. So, I mean, if you're an owner, how do you look at that, as a negative? You're saying, hey, this is a guy that really believes in his program, believes in his players. Yeah. He's sticking it out till the end. I mean, I can't see that as a detriment to him. But what I do find interesting is with him staying there, I mean, the speculation was that he was going to go to Washington all along. And Washington's like, Nebraska's on the flight on the way to Detroit. He says, nah, I'm good. And then I read today when Michael McDonald went to Seattle, supposedly Washington was calling him like, hey, can we get you over here in Washington? And he's like, nah, I'm going to go to Seattle. It certainly looks like from the outside. Now, I'm an Eagles fan, so I'm not unbiased here, but it looks like Washington is just being left at the altar by everybody. Like nobody wants to go there. And I mean, that's kind of shocking given their new ownership and, the amount of money that they have to infuse into their team. They have some decent pieces, but coaching wise,
it's 2 overall pick.
It does not look like anybody wants to. I mean, they're getting the dregs of what's left. Now, the thing is, when you hang around this long as an organization, now you get to pick from who's left after the Super Bowl. So maybe that's their play at this point, try to poach one of those guys from a Super Bowl team. But that's a dangerous game that they're playing. And certainly the optics of it aren't great for them. It certainly looks like 2 guys kind of just said, nah, I'm going to move on, or I'm going to stay where I'm at. And that doesn't look good for them.
Yeah. But what about, sorry, Rhett, I just want to bump in and talk about this Washington job here with Jay. What does that say for Eric Bieniemy, considering that he probably thought he was leaving KC to go to Washington to most likely be that head coach or future head coach there?
Right.
I don't even hear any reports that they're even giving him a look. So what does that say?
Yeah,
that's.
And what's really, I could be wrong about this, but I thought I read because he's technically still under contract as a coordinator that they were withholding him to take, interviews or opportunities elsewhere. Which if that's the case, I mean, talk about optics. That's a real bad look for them, because if they're not going to give him the head coaching gig, and they're just kind of holding him as a standby just in case they can't get anybody else, that doesn't make me want to. If I'm outside that organization, I go, that's how they treat their people. I don't think I really want to be a part of that.
That's a great point as well.
Yeah, and I mean, so the Ben Johnson thing, staying on Detroit. We've kind of talked briefly about this Washington job, so let's go ahead and ask Drew. Who do you think ends up with this Washington job?
Last thing I read was that folks were expecting Dan Quinn to get the job. I don't know how accurate that was. It was just a notification that came through to my phone, but apparently Dan Quinn's considered the favorite now. So I don't know. We'll see. That'd be quite the I wouldn't be quite as confident in Dan Quinn as I would have been Ben Johnson. So that's quite the flip if that does end up happening.
I have heard that rumor as well. Yep.
Considering that as a retread coach, those always don't work out. Sometimes they do. Lessons
especially
learned,
on the defensive side too. With how the blueprint has been basically put out there with all these guys. You still have to hit on the coach, but these young offensive minds is really what it seems like.
Yeah.
That people are going that route, and especially if you think about a team like Washington that has the number 2 pick, odds are they might be drafting their next franchise quarterback. Why would you not want to give him a young offensive-minded head coach to try to grow with them, as opposed to going and retreading with a defensive coach that's already flopped as a head coach? That just doesn't. I don't know. That doesn't make any sense to me. But I'm not an NFL GM. But
they've had Slowick, they've had McDaniel, they've had
they had quite the.
They've had all these guys,
and they let them go
in their office, and they're all gone.
Yeah. It's wild.
Weird situation. The more things change, the more they stay the same over in Washington.
Yeah.
So
bring back Trey Gruden.
Chris, quickly before we get into talking about salary cap dynasty tonight, Mike McDonald named that Seattle head coach today. Just general thoughts on that, man.
I like the fit. I was a big Pete Carmichael guy, not Carmichael, Carroll. Sorry,
no, nobody's a Pete Carmichael guy.
He's gone. He's away from the New Orleans Saints, and I love it. But I was a big Pete Carroll guy in that head coaching room for that team. So new face, excited to bring a new look there in Seattle. For me, fantasy wise, at least, it's all going to hinge on Geno Smith. So head coach or not, I'm just hoping that he can get back to that 2022 Geno Smith and bring us back to that, quarterback one presence that he was.
That Geno magic.
Who's their offensive coordinator going to be? Do we know yet?
I don't think it was announced yet.
Mm-mm.
Okay, I didn't think so either. But that's what I'm really.
That's a big thing as well. Yeah.
And that's the thing that's always fascinating me with these moves at this time of the year is, this team, Seattle just hired a head coach today. They're already behind on coordinator searches because these other teams, like the Eagles, I'm biased. I told you that's my center, but they've been picking the pile for their coordinators long before these teams even had a head coach in place. So they get an advantage, and some of these teams that go deeper that may have vacancies, they're going to be on the outside looking in because everybody else has been outside of the playoffs, and they're trying to poach these coaches. So it's fast, especially like this. You talk about the Senior Bowl this week and all that kind of stuff that goes on down there with I mean, it's just relationships and movement, all that stuff that you don't see as a fan maybe on the surface. That's all happening under the current of the NFL.
Bill Belichick to Washington. Let's go.
Have you, not to belabor this segment, but did you guys hear the rumor, speaking of head coaching, that Andy Reid's looking to retire? And the rumor is that Kansas City would bring in Belichick to replace him if Andy Reid retires.
Oh,
come on. I did not hear that.
I heard that today. And I was like, we talked about Kansas City's defense and how dominant they are and how young they are. And that's Belichick's, wheelhouse. Just think of, he doesn't really need to do much for Mahomes.
I don't want to
just throw him out in the field. Like, that's scary to me. Like, Belichick with that Chiefs team, look out.
Yeah,
I did see that. I saw that Jerry Jones said something about that. If Belichick was still around and they needed a head coach, they'd obviously, want to bring him in too. And if Andy Reid does retire like after next year, and then Ben Johnson hits the open market again, he might look pretty smart if he ends up landing Kansas City's job.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Patience would look pretty good.
Yeah, it's fair enough. All right, guys. So before we get into talking about winning leagues and salary cap dynasty, let's talk about one of the primary tools that is going to get you there in fantasydata.com. And don't forget to use the promo code Fantasy and Frames to get 20% off of your monthly subscription to some of the most useful fantasy football data and metrics out there to help you become a better player, content creator, dynasty owner, whatever it is. Once again, that is fantasydata.com, promo code Fantasy and Frames for 20% off. So, guys, let's get into the reason why we're here tonight. The reason we brought Jayson over here specifically because he and we're kindred spirits, and we knew this since day one, where we have this weird little niche pocket of fantasy football that we love to play, where all we do is basically talk nerd stuff all day, and we talk salaries and all these different contracts and all these different things. It is a very small but growing niche of fantasy football, this salary cap dynasty thing that takes the best elements of all these different formats, whether it be keeper, auction, dynasty, redraft, college to Canton, Devy. Like, you have to have knowledge of everything to roll in there and be a successful player. So, Jayson, I want to go ahead and start off by asking you this. When did you become a sicko like me and discover this? And what made you fall in love with it, man?
So I guess I would say probably like most of us, redraft was my gateway drug of choice. Everybody kind of got into fantasy football playing redraft. I was the guy with the magazine clutching it at the draft and, who my guy's going to be this year. That's how everybody got into it. Then I had a friend who I was a league mate with in my redraft league say, "Hey, do you want to join this dynasty league?" And I'm like, tell me more about what's a dynasty league? I never heard of that before. And so I joined a dynasty league. And it was not, an average dynasty league. It's a 50-man roster with taxi squads and IDP. And, I'm jumping in deep end, right out of the chute. So, but I was like smitten with dynasty, from day one. I like the year-round cycle of it, just like so many of us do. I didn't think anything could really simulate the exhilaration or, the similarities of managing an NFL squad, really kind of like it because of that year-round schedule. And then I got an invite to a salary cap league, and that really changed my perspective. Once again, that commissioner happened to also be a league mate, and he warned me that the format was a little complex, but he said there's nothing quite like it. And I said, okay, I'll give it a try. That kind of bore a striking resemblance to what I had heard about Dynasty when I got into it. So I thought, if that worked out, maybe this will too. And man, I jumped in, and the rest is kind of history. I fell in love with it. I hope to kind of convince you guys, but tonight we'll try to explain to you why it's so unique and why I think it's got a leg up on the other formats.
Yeah, I've got a pretty similar story. The gateway drugs, redraft, keeper leagues, all this different stuff. But it was one of my good friends. He's like, "Come play in here with us." And at first he explained it to me. I'm like, no, I wasn't ready yet. So I really for a while there, I was a little bit apprehensive, a little bit like these guys. Then one year, I just decided to jump in and take the plunge. And then all of a sudden, you learn, and we're probably going to talk about this a little bit later. That learning curve, those first few years, kind of just bit me in the butt hard. And then, but you know what? Once we got there, it was kind of just like, oh my God, you can't get enough. There's this year-round thing. Plus, man, it was just good stuff. So just go ahead and to introduce our fellow host here, go ahead and give them some of the main similarities that we have to offer in the salary cap dynasty league and some of the differences, some of the biggest differences as well.
Okay, sure. I can do that. I would say kind of at its core, salary cap it's still just dynasty. You want to build a team that balances your win now approach versus having a pipeline of young talent that can kind of keep you afloat for the long term. The key difference is that you're operating within a budget. So in addition to the aforementioned goals that you also have to operate from kind of a sound financial platform, if you will. If you ever played in a fantasy auction format, it's very similar. It's kind of analogous to that. However, in salary cap, when you have budgetary considerations, they last, beyond the initial startup. When you do an auction and you have like 100 fictional dollars, let's say, or 200, you're just kind of trying to put together your best team. Once that's over, those 200 fictional dollars, they're gone, and you don't ever think about them ever again. In salary cap, you think about them. You think about them for a long time, sometimes. And that's the beauty of it. I hate to say it like that and sound like I'm remorseful about it. I love that part of it, but you really have to you have to plan. You have to have a plan, and you have to make sure you're disciplined to that plan.
Yeah, that's certainly one thing that I'm going to tell you is that the discipline matters. Like it's one of these things where it's like, yeah, we're going to keep saying the word daunting because at first there is a challenge to it. I can remember stepping into that first startup auction that we had, and the way our particular league is, our structure is formatted, our servers. I don't know if y'all do it this way, but we have anywhere from a 1-year deal to a 4-year deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember early on, one of the first big contract I signed was an Amari Cooper 4-year for $88 million whenever he was in Oakland. So I was like, for me, I'm like, yeah, I'm doing great. This is awesome. This is awesome. By year 2, it's the year where Amari Cooper falls off the cliff in Oakland, right? You remember this. So then I had to make the hard decision, and I was like, one of my friends in joking, he's like, you should IR him for the season and save half the money. He's not doing anything. And me still not knowing the ropes, I'm like, okay. So then like, perfect. I get to save $11 million and have some money to spend later. Stupid mistake. But that's a lot what we're going to talk about here is that sometimes you're going to make those mistakes and then you get better for them in the long run.
Yep.
And all that. So with that said, I kind of just mentioned, the auction thing, the salary structure, the contracts, all these different things.
Yep.
And Drew and Chris, y'all are free to jump in at any time with questions or anything like that as well. But, the auction format, we had Drew Davenport on last year talking about auction, some of these different strategies you might use, whether it's running the price up, different things like that. So do you find personally, because in the leagues I play with, these guys tend to be ruthless, do you tend to see that bidding up thing happen to where you can end up with a guy who may not be so valued, trying to get a guy cornered and kind of have him in a situation where it's like all of a sudden, okay, wow, I'm stuck with Hunter Renfrow for the next 3 years at $12 million a season, even though, hey, he's probably a $6 million guy.
Yep. Oh, no question about it. That happens all the time. I would say, when we're talking strategy, your first goal when you get into a salary cap league, you're going to want to find out what all of your fellow owners, which teams are they fans of? Because I guarantee you, when it comes time to an auction, whether it's a free agent auction or a startup auction, those guys are going to overspend on the players from their hometown team, the team that they like to root for. And, you can turn the screws on those guys a little bit and say, oh, 10, I bet you do 11. I bet you do 12. And the only thing you have to be careful is that you don't get bitten and they go, nah, 12's too much. And then you're left holding the price tag on that guy. So make sure you're within your budget, but don't let them get any cheap players, and make sure you do your intel and I know I can get a little extra out of this guy, because the thing of it is, it's almost like a game within a game, really, salary cap, in that there's a chess match going on. The more I can get you to spend, the less you can spend on a player that I want let down the road. So I'm trying to get you to eke out every penny that I can, because down the road, that's going to be advantageous to me. So, I mean, now you're playing kind of mind games. I don't want to sound like, you're psyching the guy out, or you're trying to be, trying to be a jerk or something, but you really have to know what you're up against, so that where's my advantage and how can I kind of exploit this situation.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to similar into a redraft sort of format. You're always looking for those value pockets in a salary cap situation. So Drew, I'm just gonna go ahead and kick this to you. I know you're not a salary cap guy, but I mean, whenever we're talking about finding value pockets, I mean, the best way I can describe it is sort of how ADP and a lower end contract might be the same thing. So take, for example, if you're going to have a guy like Rashid Shaheed, you're probably not going to overspend on a guy like that, because in all likelihood, in a redraft format, he's going to be a late round sort of guy in all likelihood. So first, I want to ask you, just in terms of a general fantasy football format, like what is some of your go-to, like, I guess, value strategy to try to find some of those value guys?
I think the number one thing, and it's a pretty easy thing to do, whether it's your own rankings or if you're using rankings from somebody else, if they don't already have tiers, put tiers in them and draft with rankings with tiers. That's the number one basic thing, easiest thing for me to do that I have in my own personal rankings, and I just pay attention to those tiers. And if I'm looking at, am I going to get a receiver or running back? And I've got a running back that's the last one in his tier, but then I have, 10 receivers still available in my next tier receivers. I'm going to go ahead and grab that running back that I think is a cutoff at a tier of running backs in my rankings. And then I'll target receivers a little bit later on. They're just a very, very basic thing you can do to help you out in terms of not reaching for players and being able to gauge value and where the value buckets lie. But listening to you guys talk about this, it made me question, just in terms of like dynasty startups and things like that and drafting players. Is it the dynasty startup? Is it just like a traditional auction, like where you were talking about, like you get $200 and you draft players and then you have to sign them to contracts later? Or is it like a blind bid where you're having to like submit potential contracts for these guys and then you find out if you got them or not? Like, how does the startup draft process? Is it just a snake draft? Like, how do you get started?
So, I mean, Rhett's experience may be different than mine because I think he plays on a different platform. He plays on RSO. I play through MFL. So there's some intricacies that are a little bit different. When I play on MFL, when you do a startup, I mentioned the $200 fictional dollars, like from an auction league. When you play in a salary cap league, your budget is the actual salary cap of the NFL that season. Yeah. So I forget. Rhett, do you remember offhand what it was? I think it was like 200 and some million this year.
It was like 225 or something.
Yeah, right. So that's your operating budget. So you've got to get whatever your roster constraint, whether it's 20 man or 50 man or whatever it is, you got to get all your players within that 225 million.
Wow.
And so what gets tricky about that is if you're giving guys multi-year deals, you have to not only look at what's my salary this year, but what's my salary going to be a year from now or 2 years from now, just like the NFL teams have to do, because you might have a guy and say, I'm going to lock this guy up for 4 years, just like Rhett was explaining earlier in the show. And then all of a sudden, now that contract doesn't look so helpful when you're right up against your salary cap down the road. The other thing that's hard to predict is you don't know what the NFL's overall cap is going to be. Sometimes they go up 2%. And in the COVID year in 2020, they actually dropped the cap significantly because they weren't getting fans in the seats. And that killed, from a salary cap standpoint, if you were trying to project like, I'm going to get extra money next year, so I'll be fine. All of a sudden, you're way over your budget. It's like, what am I going to do with all these guys? I got them, and the cap was 205 or something. You're 20 million short of where you thought you were going to be. So you really have to kind of strategize and think ahead about that kind of stuff. That makes it really tricky.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah,
it's a game within a game.
It really is. Yeah. It really is.
100%. I'm just going to go ahead and talk about, in Reality Sports Online, it's the exact same format where we have the NFL style salary cap, and it's the annual contracts. And usually with a commissioner, how many of each type of contract you have depends on the commissioner itself. So let's say normally standard operating procedures I play in is that normally in the auction, the yearly auction, free agent auction, we're allowed 1 4-year contract, 2 3-year contracts, 3 2-year contracts, and the rest are 1-year contracts. So basically you have 6 multi-year contracts to divvy up, and then the rest of them are 1-year deals. So that's kind of where the redraft element comes into play, is that you're not going to retain every guy you draft every year for multiple years. So that opens up a lot of things as well, which, by the way, we don't have an hour to dive into all the intricacies of this thing because
come on.
The well runs way too deep. But I'll say this is that sometimes you might take a shot on a guy that you think is a little bit underrated. And I don't think we have time. I don't know if MFL does contract extensions, if it has a contract extension option.
Oh, yeah.
But there's a chance that you might take a chance on a 1-year guy and all of a sudden he blows up and you have the option to keep him further down the line for additional years in season and make that decision kind of like a GM would. Let's say you have a guy that's having a great season and all of a sudden they're like, the Saints last year in real life, they signed Carl Granson to an extension in preseason, and people were like, what are they doing with that? Come to find out, he's a pretty dang good defensive lineman. So normally that's about a month into a season where you kind of start to see, okay, these guys are having a pretty good year. And I know with RSO, the way it tends to work is that it works on an algorithm. So let's say a guy's playing really well, and you could press that button to offer an extension. The algorithm will say, okay, Michael Pittman's having a great season. His year is going to be 4 years, 120 million, 30 million per season. And you're like, all right, that's too rich right now. And he has 6 bad weeks in a row.
Mm-hmm.
And you still consider him because, he's Michael freaking Pittman. So you come back 6 weeks from now and you press that button and it's like, okay, now the offer is 4 years, $90 million, which is significantly cheaper on a yearly basis. And so that might be something you're more inclined to do. Like we said, a lot of interesting details going on. But what I want to get into now is Chris, and this is a place where you're specializing. You're a big college guy. Jayson, I want you to sell Chris right now on the rookie draft experience and how it works with the salary scale and the rookie draft itself and all those things.
All right, great. I feel like a salesman. Like I got to go back and talk to my manager and see what I can do for you, Chris. And like, what do I got to do?
You need to bring it down a couple thousand here.
What I got to do to put you in the salary cap league today?
Hey, I need the heated steering wheel. I need a little extra salary.
I'll work on it. I'll work on it. So when we talk about rookies, the rookie draft in your salary cap league is going to follow a very similar trajectory to a dynasty league. The worst teams are going to pick first, the champ goes last, all that's the same. However, the unique difference in a salary cap league is there's typically what they call a rookie wage scale, just like the NFL has. Okay. So if you're picking third overall, it's already decided that guy gets, 5 million or 10 million or whatever the number is. That's when you're picking third, that's what he gets. So when you pick eighth, that guy gets 2.5 million or whatever your scale is. That's set up by the commissioner, and that going into your draft. So what that really, the wrinkle that adds in terms of strategy is, if you're in the top 5 and you're not going to, I'm assuming it's a super flex, you're not going to take a quarterback, or you're not going to take somebody that's worth those high salaries. Now you're looking, I got to trade down because I want to take a tight end, and $10 million a year is way too rich to take up in that top 5 spot. So you got to start thinking about, what are you paying these guys based and kind of coordinate that with where are you taking them, because to take them way high is a detriment to you. Value, And the other thing that you have to think about, at least in the leagues that I play in, Rhett, you jump in if this is different than you. The unique thing about the first round in a rookie draft is they'll give those guys 5-year deals, because that's to simulate the 5th-year option that the NFL has. Those are the only players on any of the rosters that are going to get a 5-year contract. So now you're looking at, I want to lock this guy up for 5 years, just like in the NFL draft. When you get down to the tail end of that first round, when you're at 11 and 12, all of a sudden those picks get real value. That guy starts getting a lot of phone calls and texts, because it's like, that's an extra year. I can have that guy locked down. So now all of a sudden 111 and 112, they're a little bit more valuable, because once we get to 201, that's a 4-year contract. And I want the guy locked up for 5 years. So I'm making my, even if I'm at 202 and I think I can get that guy there, I got to get to 112 to get that extra 5th year and get that, even if I pay a little bit more in the salary, who cares? Because I'm getting an extra 5th year of control. And, in salary cap, the way that I think it's very special in that it emulates or simulates the NFL is that it really puts an onus on drafting well, because those are the guys, just like in the league, you've got control over them. They're under low dollar contracts. They're locked up long term. And if you draft well, you're going to have a hell of a team. If you don't draft well and you got to fill those holes through free agency, you're paying way more than what you would have paid a rookie. And now all of a sudden you've got holes elsewhere. So it really puts the onus on knowing your rookie class, drafting well, making sure that you're picking them in a spot that's favorable to your budget. And, hey, it's not for everybody, but I think, once you get into it and you're really dialed in, there's nothing quite like it.
And RSO is a little bit different in that you said you'll have automatic 5-year contracts for first round picks at MFL. RSO gives you the option of having your guys either 3-year deal or 4-year deals, depending on commissioner settings. And what they do is, for first round picks, there's a 5th-year rookie option where, just like in the league, that salary jumps up in that option year. So instead of having a guy, Jonathan Taylor, those first 3 years of a deal, he might be making as the 1-1, $8 million per season. Well, once he gets that rookie option, then all of a sudden his number jumps up to the average of the top 5 running back salaries in the league, or whatever it is. So all of a sudden, in that 4th year, that 5th year contract, Jonathan Taylor's $8 million contract. He's proven himself. You retained him. Now all of a sudden that jumps up to like a $25 or $26 million contract, depending once again on what salaries look like in your league. So it's a little bit different than RSO, but it also kind of emulates that NFL setting as well with that 50-year rookie option. So yeah, it's also a cool setting right there. So guys, we are talking right now about award-winning strategies and everything. And one of the biggest sponsors of Fantasy and Frames is TrophySmack.com. Feel the rush. Dive into the glory with promo code FIF at TrophySmack.com. Get your hands on a free fantasy football championship ring when you purchase one of their epic belts or trophies. Indulge in the extraordinary. Surrender to the allure of Trophy Smack. Use code FIF and become a legend, Trophy Smack style. Don't just listen. Immerse yourself in the seduction of success. TrophySmack.com. Immerse yourself in the seduction of success. I love that ad read every time I hear it. It just cracks me up, man. So look, we've gotten into a lot of things I wanted to talk about already in terms of salary structures, the auction, the rookie drafts, and all those different things. But we might hear we've heard what a contract might look like. Now, what I want to get into right now is kind of talking about what a good contract might look like and what a bad contract might look like. So let's take this somewhere. So give me an example of maybe somewhere in 1 year leagues where you've seen a bad quarterback contract and what that might look like. And since we know the rookies are on a rookie scale, let's look at it on a free agent perspective. So what do bad contracts look like in this sort of format, and what do they do to the team long term?
Sure. So I would say, I mean, obviously the best contracts that you can get are the low dollar long-term deals, like the rookie deals that we just talked about. And sometimes you can kind of sneak one through in a free agent auction. You say like, I got my eye on this guy. Nobody really knows anything about him. I'm going to scoop him up for league minimum and I'm going to give him a 3-year deal. You can kind of pull that sometimes, but generally somebody else is going to be savvy to a developing player. Now, conversely, the worst deals, they're going to be above market value and they're going to be on players that are declining in skill. So if you got a guy that's approaching retirement, exactly like the NFL. So if you got a guy that's kind of long in the tooth and he's making above the market value, now you got problems because you gotta clear that guy's salary off of your roster. Now, what I was going to mention, Rhett, is this is where it really gets fun. Savvy salary cap players, they're going to probably dive into actual, like I've learned so much more about actual NFL contracts and language and all that stuff through playing in these leagues. Because the first thing I do when I start to prep for like a free agent auction, I go to Spot Track and I'm like, what's this guy's real contract? How long does this NFL team have control over him? When can they cut him without a drop penalty? Like, because that really matters. And when you're handing out your contracts, I'll give you a good example this year. I had Josh Allen on my team and I wanted to get, it was a best ball league. And I wanted to get Kyle Allen, who was his backup, because I thought, like, God forbid something happens, I want to at least, be prepared. And I went and looked at his contract, Kyle Allen. It was only a 1-year deal. So I thought, I can go get Kyle Allen. No one else is going to want him because who else is going to pay big money for him? And I'm not going to give him, my tendency is to go, I got him now. I'm going to give him a long-term deal because then I'll have Josh Allen's backup forever. But if he's only going to be in Buffalo for a year, why am I wasting my contract on that guy? So I gave him a 1-year deal because I know he's good chance he's moving on to some, he's a journeyman type player. He's going to be on somebody else's roster. And when he's the backup in Seattle next year, does my roster no good being stuck there for another 2 years? So you really kind of have to not only know what your goals are as a player, as a fantasy player, but you got to know what the NFL's goals are and how they're treating these guys, what their ages are. I always go, Spot Track is good for that because it'll give you their age. It'll give you how much money they've already made. It'll give you when's the current contract going to expire with their current team? When can they get dropped? And you can kind of feel out a little bit. You get pretty savvy at, this guy's not long for this team. His contract, his deal might say he's there for 3 more years, but I think after this year, they're moving on or they're trading them or they're dropping them. And so you kind of use that to your advantage as a salary cap player.
So Chris, go ahead and tell me this because I haven't had you talking a whole bunch, and I apologize. But you play quite a bit of dynasty leagues yourself on a yearly basis. in terms of what you do traditionally in a dynasty league, are you finding any similarities or difference in terms of age apex, different things like that in terms of the salary structure in the salary cap league versus a traditional dynasty where you have a guy forever?
I find it to be complete opposites, actually. I find in a traditional dynasty league, I'm more willing to take risk because it's easier to get away from a sunken asset, where the information I've been gathering from this episode here is salary cap leagues is a lot of risk aversion, trying to get away from all that. Getting away from maybe the players like Jay just broke down that their team might not want for the long term, or might not be looking into signing for the long term. So it seems like the players or the managers that are more successful in this kind of format are the guys that don't take as much risk or try to stay away from the risk. I don't know if I'm reading that right. It could be, I could be completely seeing this from the other side, but it seems like you really got to be savvy with your budget. You gotta know a player's value, not only in the NFL, but on his team, player wise and money wise. Whereas, like regular dynasty league, I'm risking maybe if I need a tight end and I'm picking at 104 and Brock Bowers is there, maybe I'm picking at 104. But at 104, like Jay mentioned, with the way that the scale works, I'm not taking that risk to pick Brock Bowers at 104 and have to overpay him for 4 or 5 years, right? So there's some similarities, but it seems like there's a lot of differences, and I'm almost there. I'm almost sold on it.
All right, so go ahead.
Go ahead, Red. I want to touch on that then, though.
I want to go ahead and say this, is that just like in a dynasty league where you have a win now build and a rebuild sort of situation, some of these same rules generally apply.
Yeah.
So if you're in a win now sort of situation, you might be a little more likely to take on a Tyreek Hill and pay him a little bit more because he is a guy that can help deliver you a championship. Whereas if you were a guy who is out of contention for the next 3 years and you realize your roster isn't all that, well, if Tyreek Hill's on my roster at that point, the rest of the roster is garbage. I could see a guy who's looking to win a ring now or that's close, and I go ahead and I can move back into that draft, maybe get a first-round pick off of him because he's close to winning a championship at that point. Then not only are you saving yourself money, but you're also helping to restock your roster as well.
So with that, though, are you more likely to move a player like Tyreek Hill if you're in that situation for a little bit less? As we're a dynasty league, you're still going to hold on to him because you don't have to carry that contract, and you're going to try if a contending team wants him, you're going to try to squeeze out as much as you can because you don't have to worry about being cost effective and anything like that. So, do you find in salary cap leagues that you'd move a player like that for a little bit less just to move the contract, like the NFL would?
Sometimes. But once again, that depends on knowing your league mates. Because if I have a guy,
sure, there's tons
I have a guy in one of my leagues who he is just. I like to say he's always trying to build the Avengers. And what I mean by that is that in this past year, my man went out and he acquired all in one offseason, stacked up all these first round draft picks, and ended up in the same offseason acquiring Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson. Needless to say, we know him as a big LSU fan now. So if you have a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who, we know probably doesn't hold a whole lot of value, correct? But you might be able to maybe squeeze this guy for a little bit extra because he's an LSU guy. So once again, it just comes down to knowing your league mates. But yes, there are also situations where, all right, you're out of contention. Not only are you trying to move this guy for a little bit less, but you might be willing, in order to pick up a draft pick, take a bad contract off of them as well. So that way you can ultimately, sweeten the deal for them, get that draft pick back that might help you out more. And then you can still save some money on the back end and maybe cut that other guy and end up saving some money there as well. So once again, there's no easy answer. It's all super nuanced, but that's the best way we can probably answer that. Now, right. Jayson, what were you going to say just now? I'm sorry.
I mean, that's a perfect segue into what I was going to talk about, which is, I think, Chris, your initial read is probably spot on for what most new players in salary cap would feel, which is I don't want to make any mistakes here. I got to play this safe. I got to be real conservative.
Thing, right? Yeah.
And I think that's probably totally normal. That's probably the way that I played it. I mean, I've been in it so long, I don't remember what my initial approach was, to be honest. But the longer you're in these leagues, you learn the subtleties of kind of like risk management or risk mitigation,
Sure.
I would call it.
Yep.
And so there's things that you can do to kind of make those risks less. And one, you know, when we talk about these contracts, again, this is by platform, so I'm going to be speaking to what I have experience with, but there's typically a drop penalty. So in the leagues that I'm in, the drop penalty is 25% of the remaining value of the contract. If you're going to drop a guy, say you have a guy that's got $1 million contract and it's a 4-year deal. If you drop that guy, you're paying $1 million cap hit to your salary cap in that particular season. But then he's off your roster. Then you're clear and free and clear of him. Now, if you got a guy that's making $10 million on a 4-year deal and you drop him, you're going to pay a $10 million penalty to your cap, which is pretty substantial. When you get into those situations, you're going to be looking for a trade partner because you're going to say, if you trade that guy off of your roster, you get all that cap space back. You don't pay any penalty. And so what happens is, just like in a dynasty league, your bottom feeder guys, the guys that are in a rebuild mode, they probably have a lot of cap space, and they're going, well, I'll take that $10 million contract for that guy that's no good. But if I'm going to take him from you, I want some draft capital to go with it.
Yeah.
And so you're willing to pay that draft capital just to clear that salary, you know, that dead salary off of your roster. So you kind of learn these little tricks like, okay, this guy's not contending. I could probably talk to him and he would take this deal. Now that guy in turn is just going to drop him, but he has a space and that $10 million hit's not going to hurt him in that season because he's not contending anyway. So that's what I mean. Like, there's ways to get bad contracts off of your roster if you do it in a smart way. You just have to kind of learn the ropes. So I don't want to scare anybody and have them think like, oh, you can't take any risk and you can't make any mistakes, because that's truly not true. It's just you have to learn how to get yourself out of those situations when they occur.
When to take the risks, where to take the risks. So I just got one question before we jump into anything else. I was gonna take an orphan from Rhett. Another couple points that I've taken from this conversation here is that league mates are probably some of the most important parts of these leagues because of the way that the league is built and the teams are built with the contracts and how you hand out contracts and stuff like that. Do you find it easier to fill an orphan team? Do you give any kind of leniencies to orphan managers? Is it just like because he showed me the team and it was a rough team. They had a ton of cap space, a good amount of capital, but it was just like, if I'm going to jump into this and I'm going to take an orphan and put any kind of investment of money or time into it, if the orphan team is not just set up in a way where I can at least try to compete as a newbie, maybe if it was someone that had a couple years experience in the format, they might have a better look at how to rebuild the team. But I was getting at anyways, are orphans easier to fill, or do you find orphans a little bit trickier to fill?
I mean, in my experience, I can only go off of my experience, but I do think, you know, that's part of what we're doing here. There's a little education, a little outreach to get people educated on the format and get people excited about the format because it can be intimidating to people. And you go to somebody and you say, not only would you like to play salary cap, but would you like to come in on this roster that somebody's completely botched and then you take it over, but you pay full price? No, you know, nobody wants to do that because it's already kind of like imposing. And then you're like, okay, great. Now I got an uphill battle on top of that. Like, I don't want to face that. So yes, I do think it's tough to fill the orphans. I'm not going to lie to you. I think that's why it's even more critical when you're in a startup mode that you make sure you find committed owners and you find people that like are dependable and, you know, that you can count on and that are legitimately interested. Because if somebody kind of just has a path, you have to be committed to this format. It's not something you just kind of wake up today and kind of lick your finger and go, I think I'll try this out. Like, you got to really like
waiver wire.
Right. You got to find the hardcore guys that are really into it, because if you start off with anything less, it's going to bite you in the long term and your league's going to collapse.
So yeah, Drew, I'm gonna ask you right now. We've heard Chris say he's almost over the line, man. Where you at right now?
I'm very interested. I told myself this offseason I wanted to expand a little bit, and I'm gonna pit you guys against each other because I was trying to decide, do I want to do a salary league or do I want to do like a Devi or a C2C league? And I
Do
don't know if I
both.
want to dive into both in the same
Do a
off
C2C
season.
salary cap league.
I think that might be one of the first of its kind. So I'm intrigued. I'm very intrigued. I like the GM aspect of it, and I love the idea of like there were like regardless of league, if you perform well in your rookie drafts, you get rewarded for it as a dynasty manager. Like you get to reap those rewards regardless. But it feels like that those wins would be so much sweeter in a salary cap league. Let's just say there's a salary cap dynasty rookie manager out there that drafted Puka and Tank Dell in the 3rd and 4th round of rookie drafts this year. Like that guy is living the life right now.
Someone out there has done that too, I guarantee you.
Yeah, like so that aspect is very, very, very intriguing to me. I think that the rookie, I really started to get excited whenever you guys were talking about the rookie draft. That's what really started to pique my interest, was just thinking about the positive and negatives that can come with that and how important that can be. And even the strategy of just like the picks being weighted in terms of salary. And so just like if your cap situation isn't great, you can't be like, oh, I'm just going to go trade for the 101, the 102, 103, 104. Like that might not be that might not be a possibility for you. Even no matter how many picks you think you can trade around, things like that, you can't just wheel and deal like that anymore. You have to really put some thought behind it. So
I have seen guys time out in rookie drafts because they didn't have the cap space to make their pick on the clock. Like that's how crazy it can get.
And there are also
you have to have the cap space available at the time of that pick.
Correct.
Like
you can't go over.
You can't like make cuts after the draft or
no. And what happens is if your league mates are smart, because what that guy's going to do is he's going to try to clear some space so that he can make that pick.
Yeah, and I'm not trading.
And everybody's like, "Now, good luck with that because you should have done that 2-3 weeks ago." And we're in the draft now, so you can just kind of get skipped because nobody wants to trade. Like that's how fine a point you can put on this stuff. And you know, to your point about the draft and how you can set yourself up. I drafted. I mentioned earlier I have Josh Allen on one of my rosters. I drafted him in like the 2nd round. And I'm still only paying him like $7 million, where like market value is like 20-30 million for a quarterback. And so that roster is just stacked. I got Jalen Hurts in like the 3rd round of the following draft, like 2 drafts later, and he's making like $5 million. So it's a super flex league. I got those 2 guys, and my league mates are like fighting over Russell Wilson at $30 and $40 million, and I got Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts just sitting there chilling, making 12 combined.
Like so you got those guys like in the startup draft, but just early in their
career. I got them in their rookie draft, in their respective rookie drafts.
So in a super flex league in rookie drafts, they were going that late.
Yeah, well, if you remember when Josh Allen came out, he was like
not popular.
He was poo-pooed by the establishment. Everybody said like his footwork was terrible and he didn't have sound fundamentals. And I just remember watching
the day 2 pick,
watching his workouts and watching him launch the ball like 70 yards with a flick of the wrist. And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I think I'm gonna take a shot on this guy in the 2nd round. Now, I didn't think he was going to be what he's become. No, anybody that tells you that is lying to themselves. But just that's the kind of control and kind of dominance that you can set yourself up with if you draft well. Because now I got those guys well under market value. I'm using my extensions on those guys, and I don't care what it costs because it's going to be way below what I would pay for a quarterback in a free agent auction. And just by being prepared and kind of rolling the dice on some guys like that, it makes all the difference.
I think that kind of goes to show just how different how much super flex leagues have evolved too, because like you think about where Josh, like regardless how people felt about him, you remember where he got drafted in the NFL draft.
Yep.
Like there's no shot in today's world, even if you hate him, that he makes it to the 2nd round.
Right.
Like I'm not crazy about the quarterbacks outside of the top 3 this year, like JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, those guys. But if one of them ends up getting drafted, like I have none of those 3 in my top 12 right now for Superflex. I only have 3 quarterbacks in my top 12. If one of those guys on draft day gets drafted in the top 10 of the NFL draft,
Yeah,
they're going to be my top 12, even
right.
regardless of how I feel
totally,
about it.
I totally agree. Obviously, because that's where I was at. I was like, yeah, I'll take this guy. Nobody else wants him. Now I've gotten burned. I've taken Mac Jones. I had Mac Jones on my roster, but even him, he was a starting NFL quarterback that I had at 30% of market value, and he could be my QB too. And I had Herbert as my other on that roster. Okay,
at least you get a good rookie year out of him.
Right, exactly. And even if he's just playing and he's putting in some stats, there's only 32 guys in the league putting in stats. So I'll take him, at a cheap price.
Just a tip in general is like these rookies, these rookie first round quarterbacks, like they hold their value. Like even if they're bad for a year, they're going to hold some trade value. Like Mac Jones, like even if you weren't crazy about Mac Jones where you took him, he played decent his rookie year. He held his trade value. You could have flipped him after his rookie year, and you rather flipping him for a rookie pick and re-rolling and just going for another quarterback or flipping for a different established veteran. Like those rookie picks, man, they just continue to go up in value. So I don't know, man. I like it.
Yeah.
I think we're slaying them.
Yeah, I think we're there. So look, that's us doing the elevator pitch. So Jayson, speaking of, man, heading into 2024, I want you to do two things right now. Number one, give me one bold fantasy football prediction, whether it be in general or salary cap for the 2024 season. And then also let us know what you're working, what you got going on inside and outside of the fantasy space right now, dog.
Sure, absolutely. So we'll start off with the prediction. I gave this some thought. I saw it on the show sheet, and I thought I'm gonna go deep on this. We all know Kirk Cousins is a free agent, and there's conjecture that Minnesota is going to let him walk because he wants a high dollar deal, and supposedly like teams like Atlanta are suitors for him. So he's going to have some options. I'm going to say my deep prediction is he walks, and Justin Jefferson, as a consequence, falls out of the top 10 of wide receivers in 2024.
Wow.
Ooh. So I know that sounds particularly spicy, but I mean, after Cousins left the lineup due to injury this year, Jefferson was obviously also out due to injury, but he was just 12.2 fantasy points per game in PPR, which ranked 10th over that period. So I know it. And then, I mean, they had a rotisserie of journeymen and rookies and whatever up there. But even so, I looked at what other free agent QBs are going to be available, and there's not really anything besides Cousins. So they're probably going to have to go with a rookie if they let him go. And, I think a rookie's going to take some time no matter who they get because they're in the middle of the pack of that draft. They're not up at the top unless they trade up. So then you're looking at maybe a middling talent that's a rookie, and he's got to get adjusted to the NFL and play right away, unless they go with one of the guys that they used this year, which we already saw where that landed Jefferson. So, it's bold. I'll admit that, but I think it's within the realm of possibility.
Oh, absolutely. I love it. Let's go. Yeah. And so go ahead and drop us what you got going on inside and outside of fantasy space right now. What you working on?
So this time of the year, I mean, I think everybody, I mentioned the Senior Bowl, everybody's kind of tuned in when you're in Dynasty to the rookies, what the rookie class is shaping up like. We're going to be on the combine soon enough, and we're going to be talking about. So I'm working on profiles. I'm studying the rookies just like everybody else. I should have some profiles out on Dynasty Nerds. I'm working on some for Bo Nix right now. We just talked about middling quarterbacks in the first round. he may be that guy that goes in the teens somewhere. So I'm excited to see what this class shakes up as, and we're just starting to hear the rumblings of how they're matching up at Senior Bowl practices and stuff like that. So that's where my focus is, and that's where my content will be coming forward.
Beautiful, man, beautiful. And as always, we thank you so much. You're such a good friend, original friend of this iteration of Fourth and Frames, man. You're such an awesome guy. We love you. We love having you here every time, and the door is open for you anytime you want to come back, of course.
Hey, man, if you guys are going to keep giving me my flowers, I'll be here. That sounds pretty nice.
So, guys, that is it. As usual, we want to thank all of our viewers, all of our listeners, all of our watchers for tuning in with us on a weekly basis. You can find our man Jayson Snyder at Spide78 on the X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. You can see my man Drew at Drew3MR on Twitter. Chris Battistel at FFChrisB, and the One Foot Down College Football Fantasy Podcast, ladies and gentlemen. And myself at R Manual Sports. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your time. Fourth and Frames. Toodles.